Monday morning, January 17th, I am working by myself and I get dispatched to a one-man call, which is kind of the less exciting calls. My partner had something else to do that day. So I'm like, kind of, enough time on the job where I roll my eyes a little bit at being dispatched to a theft of a chocolate bar. Literally, it's a chocolate bar. And at the 7-Eleven. And so downtown Douglas Street, super busy Monday morning. Everyone's hustling and bustling, getting their coffees, going to work. And this call comes in. So I go and I meet the store clerk. He takes me to the back and is working on the surveillance for me. I'm gonna investigate this shoplifter to the best of my abilities. And I leave his office and I go towards, it had this big double glass door, and I leave the door and this man is walking towards me, and I assume, like the 1,000 other times in my life where someone's walking towards me or I'm holding a door, that they want to enter the store. And he approaches me and I have one hand up on the door. I'm holding the door open for him and I'm smiling at him and I say, "There you go, sir." He looks at me kind of like a puppy dog does when they're trying to understand what you're saying, and tilts his head and says, "Actually, no." And that was my only hint that something was off. And before I know it, he reaches behind his back and does this huge telegraphing motion towards my head. And he's got a knife and he stabs me in the neck. I put my hands up to block the knife and the fight is on. He stabs me. It went through my ear and right onto my carotid artery. Fortunately, it went through my hand before it went into my neck. And he tells me he's going to kill me, and he is trying to kill me, and I believe him. So fight's on. I managed to hip toss him to the ground. We go to the ground. He lands on his back. Again, I was in peak physical condition at that time, but I certainly got very lucky with how we landed on the ground. I ended up getting full mount on him. His wrists hit the pavement and bounced off the sidewalk, and that allowed me to grab both of his wrists and pin them to the ground. I know he stabbed me one more time on the way down in the neck. I could feel it, but just I had this huge wave of adrenaline that came over me. So I've pinned him to the ground and I need to go for my gun. This man's trying to kill me. I haven't been able to create distance at this point to go for my gun. Initially, had I dropped my hands down to get my gun, I'd be dead because my hands wouldn't have taken that initial blow to my neck. So I'm on top of him and I'm willing myself to let go of him to go for my gun again. I look at the place on his face where I want to shoot him, and I steel myself to release his hand to go for my gun again. When I do this, he throws the hand that I've just released over my back and tries to fish the knife to the hand that I've just released. And so, my gun was useless to me that day. It may as well have been in my locker still. So I just start hitting him as hard as I can. I go into this just blind tunnel. They talk about tunnel vision. I had it just locked on him and am hitting him as hard as I can. And it's not until I hear a woman's voice telling me to stop and that I'm hurting him that I'm kind of taken out of this kind of rage of trying to defeat him. At that point, I realized that there's people around me. Like I said, it's downtown on the main strip of downtown Victoria. And I realized there's friendly people around me and that the knife was no longer in his hand and that he had been effectively neutralized. And I go to put him in handcuffs and I realized that I had broken this hand and I was bleeding pretty badly. And then I go to use my other hand and I realized that this hand was I had just skin and meat and I could see my skeleton of my thumb, which was weird because I was not feeling any pain. I could not feel it at all. And they say that pain lets you know that you're alive. And well, at that point, I knew I'd been stabbed in the neck twice and I'm not feeling any pain. So that was a pretty scary realization that it was just shocking to see that and to not be feeling it. So I had actually gotten a 1033 code out, which is the officer in trouble code, and I could hear sirens coming, which was an amazing. I talked earlier about that team dynamic, and when you hear your friends coming to help you, it's one of the best feelings in the world. So I hear the sirens coming. I know that this guy is not going to get away with doing this to me, and help is coming. So
I know, having talked to some other people who've gone through similar experiences in episodes, that at that point you realize, okay, this isn't going to go on forever and I am going to survive. And there's obviously a response to that in the moment. But firstly, I just want to thank you for sharing this, because I've watched you as you've shared that so far. I know the journey's not over. And that's obviously a traumatic experience, even just to recount, let alone to have gone through. And so I really appreciate you sharing that with us right now and with the listeners who can't see the physical tenseness in your body as you tell that story. As I said, so I've given you a chance to take a breath there as well. Mm-hmm. As I said, once you recognize that this trauma is about to finish, the intense acute trauma, but the trauma isn't finished yet, as evidenced by the fact that you're still talking about it and it still affects you today. Talk to us a little more about what, and I assume this is where you and Brian start to cross paths, is what happens as part of what they call in the mission critical community, the residue of this incident, the thing that stays with you even though it's finished and he's subdued and taken into custody.
It's funny because 10 years later, it is still, I'm sweating right now. It's a hard story to recount. And one of the reasons is because, so when help arrived and I still wasn't feeling any pain, there was a moment where I started to black out and I thought that I was dying. And it was the thought of being 24 years old and someone have to go to my house and tell my mom that I had died in the line of duty was just, that feeling is something I'll never be able to rid my body of. And in that moment when I was blacking out. I had like the little black dots in the corner of my eyes and I was going unconscious. And that's what I thought. I was feeling my neck to see how bad the wounds were. And all I was getting back was the meat and blood from my hands. And so I thought I had this huge gaping hole in my neck. And so my friend Shannon arrived on scene and pulled me into the ambulance. I don't remember how I got in the ambulance, and she starts ripping off my clothes and just telling me like, you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. And I remember kind of just coming to and thinking like that she was kind of patronizing me and just giving me the old like, hang in there, kid. But she said to me like, no, it's your hands. Like your neck is actually, it's fairly superficial. Like you're going to be okay. I'm not finding any other stuff. And she's ripping off my clothes and all my kit. And she's like, it's just your hands. And I remember I felt really sick all of a sudden and I puked. I hit the back of the ambulance with just this wave of vomit. Sorry if people are eating their breakfast right now, but I remember when all that adrenaline basically came out in puke form, I remember feeling all the pain. My hands hurt, my neck hurt, everything hurt. And I just remember feeling so happy that I was alive. Yes, yeah. I was feeling my body and I believed her that I was going to be okay. So that's, like, to answer your question, I was going to be physically okay. The journey that I went on post that moment where, of course, this is a big story. This is not something that happens very often. Cop gets ambushed, holding the door open for someone and not even related to that person while I was there and stabbed in the neck. Like, it's a big story. So the attention and...
So this wasn't the thief who stopped a random person attacking a police officer in uniform.
Yep. It was a man who just wanted to kill a cop that day, and he happened to pick me. I had never met him before, just someone who hated the police. So it was pretty shocking, which is part of the feelings afterwards. It's just shocking. So I was at that point still a 24-year-old female trying to do something that females had never done before, get on this team. And there was a bit of a narrative out there that females shouldn't be allowed out on their own as police officers. I was waiting for surgery. I severed 2 tendons in my hand and I was in the hospital the next morning. And the people in the cubicle next to me were whispering about that. Can you believe they let female officers out on their own? Like it's crazy. And I couldn't tell my story because there was going to be a trial. So it was on video and I obviously had a statement of what happened and I couldn't share that. So people couldn't see the video and that, I did in fact handle myself in that moment and did what I needed to do to go home at the end of the day. But People were fixated on this, why are females out there on their own? Like, that's super dangerous. So I set out to prove that I just, wanted to be tough, and I wanted to prove that narrative wrong, and without being able to tell my story and without people being able to watch the video. So, I did everything I could to come back physically. I drove my hand therapist nuts. I said, you know what? There's going to be an ear 2 tryout and I'm going to be there. So get me ready. I'll do push-ups on my elbows. I relearned how to shoot with a different grip. I learned how to grab a pull-up bar with a different grip, a barbell. I just was hell-bent on getting back physically. And I was able to do that. I won an international fitness competition in New York. Months later, I became the first girl on SWAT. I did a bunch of competitions. I won those, and I was just out there proving that girls could do amazing things. But that was hiding what was really going on. And that was when I was going home, I was having insane nightmares where I would end up in my kitchen and have no idea how I got there. I had to clear my bedside table of all the furniture because I would wake up fighting, and I broke both my lamps on my side tables, and I would wake up just covered in sweat. I couldn't cut food with a knife. I went back to work after 2 months. I would go to these calls, knife calls, weapon calls. I'd hold doors open for people. But as I'm holding doors open for people, I'm thinking, how am I going to kill them before they kill me? Which is a very weird way to think, because I hold doors open for people all the time. And it was unpleasant the way that I was thinking about it.
Yeah, I was going to say it's adaptive. Like, that's a reasonable thought if you've been in the position you've just described. I don't know if there's many humans who wouldn't start thinking that way.
But it felt crazy. And it felt like my mind was running away from me, and I had post-traumatic stress disorder, but I was hiding it because I was embarrassed. And we didn't have a culture even 10 years ago where it was safe to talk about and to admit that we were struggling. And so I did all this in complete silence. I didn't tell anyone. I checked all the boxes to get back to work, and I got back to work immediately.
And so what was the turning point for you then? Because we could make an entire season out of SVU out of this, but we're not going to. We have only got an hour here or a little more. We will extend based on how amazing this conversation is. But how do you get to a point where you recognize that this isn't healthy or that something has to change and that you decide to bend instead of pushing through it?
So I didn't. I crashed hard. That's how I met Brian. Brian, so about a year or so after the incident, Brian came to Victoria and did a class. And so I was in this class, and I was with 30 of my peers from other agencies, and Brian played a radio broadcast of a police officer who'd been shot in the face. This radio broadcast triggered everything. So up to this point, I've been able to deal with the symptoms of my PTSD by myself. I'd been able to hide them. I was trapped in this classroom with 30 of my peers, and I was at the back, and I had a complete panic attack. My heart started racing. I was crying. I had a complete emotional breakdown in front of all these people. So now I've essentially been exposed. And I think I scared poor Brian. Well, I didn't, because he's a stud, and this is, something he recognized as a reaction to a traumatic, a trigger, essentially. This radio broadcast was brutal to listen to for anyone in the room. It was a really raw broadcast of an officer in a life or death situation. And so
for those who we'll put a link at the bottom of the show if we can find that, just to really flesh it out a little bit for listeners who are that keen on being disturbed. Keep going.
So I just had this complete emotional reaction to this broadcast. And so ultimately it exposed me as not being okay. And my coworkers recognized this, because it was beyond a normal reaction. And so that night I was told, you made people nervous today. You're clearly not okay. You need to go to a doctor and get a diagnosis. And so I was now being told I wasn't allowed to go back to work.
So you had to?
I had to. Yeah, because my job was everything to me at that time. I didn't have any balance in my life. I was obsessed with work, with trying out for the team, with being on the team. And so I was forced to go to the doctor. The doctor immediately diagnosed me with post-traumatic stress disorder. And I was in a pool of pity after that. And then Brian actually reached out to me after that. And offered me a lifeline. He threw me a life preserver, and I took it. And he invited me to Calgary, where I got to listen to some incredible speakers, Jared Reston and Bob Delaney. And that is what started me on the journey of giving myself permission to be, mentally injured and to put the work in to get back. And I did. And now I'm living my best life with PTSD.